All right, now speaking of controversial action, the so-called Freedom Convoys making their way from Ottawa to Jerusalem. Israelis inspired by the protests in Canada, slowing major roadways between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem today. And this as part of reinvigorated demonstrations against ongoing COVID regulations. Joining me to discuss is Director of the School of Public Health at Gurion University and advisor to the National Coronavirus Cabinet, Professor Nadav Davidovitch. Professor, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Now, the means of the protest aside, would you agree that perhaps it's time to loosen up?
Wow, we did already lift many of the restrictions. We need to remember that still the number of infections in the community is very high. So using masks, especially in closed places and large gathering, I think it's still very relevant. We don't have the green pass for now. We need to see maybe in the future if there'll be the epidemiological necessity to bring it back. And I think that in general, if you go outside in the street, you'll see that apart from masks, things are almost back to normal.
But again, as you said, we've already lifted I'm sorry to cut you off, but as you said, we've already lifted tons of restrictions anyway. Is it fair then to keep the public in this state of limbo indefinitely? Maybe they'll come back tomorrow, maybe they won't. It makes it impossible for a family to make any future plans, say for travel, say for really anything.
So this evening we're going to have the Cabinet of Experts meeting in order to see how we can learn even more to live with the virus. You're absolutely right that probably the main issue right now is the question of international travel. I think that in the coming months, there need to be much more coordination and we can lift some of the restrictions. We need to remember that still, unfortunately, there is a huge gap in vaccination rates around the globe, and this creates a fertile ground for variants. But probably the coming month in 2022 would be the year that we're going to proceed and kind of turning into an endemic phase. But endemic phase meaning that we still need to be very, very proactive, especially with vaccination. I think we failed in the last few months, especially among young adults and also children. And that's something that we need to see how to deal with, and also taking care of the really overstressed healthcare system and the question of long COVID. It's being discussed now all over the world. We're not sure how Omicron is going to influence long COVID. It's still early.
All right. So, you mentioned that you're going to be meeting with the coronavirus cabinet in your advisory capacity very soon. What might you actually suggest in terms of concrete terms? What might you suggest that we relinquish? Maybe the use of antigen tests and requirements for antigen tests, which are already unreliable in many cases, or I don't know, you tell me.
I think the antigen test, the home antigen test actually got a very bad public relations, and I think it's not the right case, because if you're using them properly, they can be very useful. Of course, PCR are more accurate, but
well, I know from my own personal experience, I know that it's anecdotal, but I know that when I took a antigen test at home a couple weeks ago, I personally was a lot more thorough than the Magen David Adom was when I went to go confirm that test the next morning. I went all the way to the back of my throat and in my nose and hitting the tonsils, and then I go to Magen David Adom and they just did a little, and I walk away. Is that a trustworthy test?
We know that you don't need to go through a lobotomy, in order to get the right way of doing it. Of course, we want to get back to normal life, but even if you compare to what was here about a year ago, I think that it's very, very different. Probably the main areas where we're still facing, the difference, probably schools opening and tests, and there maybe we need to do something different. I'm very frustrated that we didn't manage to reduce the number of children in class and be much more proactive in teaching outside and all of that. These are recommendations we gave about a year and a half ago, and this could be, helping the educational system anyway, and also the question of international travel. Other than that, keeping masks for a few more weeks, I think this is the right advice, but strengthening the healthcare system, both community and hospitals, and also all the issue of the genetic typing, including the sewage surveillance that Israel is now leading all over the country. These are things we must continue to do, because there is, unfortunately, the probability that we're going to see, another variant because of the gaps in vaccination rates.
All right, well, obviously we hope that we're not going to have any more waves of this horrible pandemic. Professor Davidovitch, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you.
ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at iltv.tv and watch from any device.